www.eitzchayim.org. You can stay up to date with us at our website or on Facebook. Lots of different ways to check in with Congregation Eitz Chayim. Again, a welcoming, inclusive Jewish home on the Treasure Coast, just for you to join us and enjoy your Jewishness. Renew your inner Jew at Congregation Eitz Chayim.
This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. It is time for Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And a beautiful Friday it is.
Oh, it is.
I am so glad that I know that it's still hot in many parts of the country and they're still experiencing that heat wave, but it feels like it's at least a little bit broken for us.
And drier.
My plants are not quite so happy about that part, but yes. I'm having to water them, but yeah, I am glad that it feels comfortable and cool and not like walking into a steam pit.
Yeah, that's right. So how is the book going?
The book is going well, and that's Hope, Strength, and Healing for the Wounded Soul, a book about trauma and first, secondary, or I should say acute, personal, and secondary and also tertiary trauma. So a little bit about trauma as we come into the high holiday season, and I'll talk more about that. But trauma, you can experience trauma by watching it or by experiencing it. So you might be the victim of it, but you also might be the witness of it. So a lot of people, for example, were traumatized by 9/11 because they watched it on TV. And there are people who were traumatized by COVID, certainly because they were, in fact, victims of it, or they saw somebody succumb to the disease. So that's first-degree trauma. That's you are involved in the trauma, either witnessing it or being part of it. And then secondary are the people who take care of those who are injured by the trauma in whatever way, the caregivers. And tertiary are the people that they talk to that hear about it and are still traumatized. It's so impactful. And we see that more and more and often, quite often. So we certainly saw trauma. So we were talking about COVID a moment ago. We saw trauma in a lot of the first responders and the healthcare folks that were dealing with the trauma. Right. And
especially the ER nurses. I mean,
oh yeah,
it seemed like
just over and over and over again.
Like it never stopped.
Right. Just the sheer slamming of it. And for hospitals are really not that accustomed to death as people were with COVID. We don't think about that. But most people who go to the hospital actually recover.
Makes sense, yeah.
Whereas so many of those who came in with COVID did not. It was just so profound. There were people dying of COVID in the height of it several times a day. And why do I say hospitals are not as used to that? Among other things, if somebody's gone to the hospital for a terminal condition or for something from which they're not going to recover, they are typically transferred to hospice, linger for some number of days to months to even years, and then pass. So they pass in hospice, not in the hospital. And so hospitals themselves are not as accustomed to death as we think. And so COVID, that wasn't the case. People were not being transferred to hospice. They were dying in the ICUs. Yeah so we don't think about that.
No.
I want to give a shout out to Grey's Anatomy that I think did an excellent portrayal.
Oh, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, Grey's Anatomy back in when they started up right after the shutdown from the pandemic, they actually, because it's a show about the hospital, right, Grey Memorial, I forgot the whole name of the hospital.
In Seattle, yeah.
In Seattle, right? So it's a fictitious hospital in Seattle. And because they are the people who work in the hospital, they dealt with it very seriously. And you saw some of the nurses screaming and crying and doctors screaming and crying. There's nothing we can do. We do what we can, and then it's just hope that somebody recovers. Some do, but many didn't. And, just one of the pieces coming to us out of COVID. And this almost feels like the first real time after it. And, of course, we are having a rise, so we are thinking about that, and we're talking about spacing the seats so that people are not on top of each other. And, trying to recover.
4 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Or almost.
Yeah. Well, we did flatten the curve. We did flatten the curve
Yes.
up. It was not the horrendous spike that plagues have been in the past. As horrible as it wasn't that spike. And as it was, we overwhelmed hospitals. We overwhelmed, ready for this, funeral services. Mortuaries were just stacked to the gills and couldn't process the normal kinds of funerals because of limitations of how many people, who, where, what, and how. So there were many, many secondary and tertiary effects of COVID. In fact, I've got a section in the book on COVID trauma because it was so big, so devastating. Kids were out of school. Parents didn't know how to work with their kids. They didn't know how to discipline their kids and keep them in front of the screen. They're used to dropping the kid off at school and let the teachers do all the disciplining. It doesn't work that way when they're homeschooled. And a lot of kids thought, oh, this is just for a week or two, so I can goof off. And then when it was 3, 4, 5, 6, and on, the goofing off unfortunately became a habit.
Well, we were fortunate in Florida to have the schools pretty much open up right away, but still. It really has taken its toll.
It has.
Yeah, you talk to folks at your school at IRSC.
Well, and IRSC, of course, did not open, but they opened virtually.
Yes, right.
Right, and a lot of schools opened virtually, which is not the same, because the challenge with the virtual is you've got it's different when the teacher is in the room with 30 students and when you're on the screen with 30 students. First of all, you can't see 30 students. So she or he's got to pan through the students in order to keep track. But there's so much that's off screen that you can't see. And you can't tell if the student's taking notes or if they're playing tiddlywinks, unfortunately.
That would have been me.
And I get that, and it certainly was a number of other students. Right, there were students who naturally tested the limits of the system.
Sure.
And it was a system, because it came in so quickly, and so there wasn't time to ramp up and teach people how to use it properly. So there were a lot of technical side issues associated with learning to use it, and the how do I mute, how do I not mute. I was actually lucky in that I was teaching, at that time I was teaching the Chinese, if you remember. And that, of course, is done on screens because I'm here in America and they're there in China. It's a little more challenging. But
you're here in America in the middle of the night when it's daytime the next day over in China.
That's true. 11 o'clock at night was 11 o'clock in the morning for them.
Wow.
So.
Do you miss that, though?
I miss the students. I don't miss being up.
Well, no.
Yeah. I'm a night owl, and I thought that would be fine because I was, or am. I still am. And so, yeah, until about midnight, 1 o'clock, it was fine. It's when I decided to extend it a little further and try to make up for it that ended up not working for me. And I'm willing to admit that. I thought I could do it. If I had maybe been 20 or 30, maybe I could have. Not at 903, as I tell my students. So, yeah. What can I say? It was a good learning experience. I enjoyed doing it. And when the opportunity came to switch to teaching Kaiser during the day, it was a welcome change.
You seem to have some fascinating stories from some of the kids in China.
Part of what I really, aside from the wonderful, wonderful kids, and most of them were wonderful. And because it was one-on-one, you really got to know the student. People may not realize this. You may sit there and be going over, whatever in English, or we did a little bit of math. We did word problems. Word problems is a fun way to do reading while you're doing math. And so we did a lot of different kinds of things. We did games, and if the student covered all the material in the time, then we would play a game for the last couple of minutes, and it was interesting to see what kinds of games they played. So, yeah, and I dealt with kids down from 4. There were 4-year-old kids learning English with me, all the way up through high school students who still took lessons with me.
Now, did you ever deal with the parents at all?
Sometimes the parents would be on screen and they'd stop in, and I would talk to them. Sometimes the parents didn't speak English.
Oh, yeah. Well,
sometimes they did. Often they did. And so, yeah, the parents would sometimes drop in on the class. Other times, you could tell that the parent was just off screen watching the kid to make sure they did their lesson.
Okay, yeah.
And you could tell that because the kid constantly is looking at the parent. It becomes real obvious. And, so very often the parent was there and part of it. Sometimes, for example, if the family was living in Shanghai or in Hong Kong or Shenzhen, then the parents very often spoke English quite well. And then you were actually able to have a great conversation with the parents when they dropped in. Sometimes it was grandparents, sometimes it was nannies. It's all different kinds of folks.
But
Nannies
did the
usually
grandparents speak English?
Sometimes, not always.
Okay,
It depended.
Interesting.
And so they've got a different typical family scenario, which is that you typically have the child and the parents of that child, and you typically have the parents of the husband. And I was explaining that to my students at both IRC and at Kaiser, actually, that one of the reasons for the preference for male children when China went to the one-child program, which thank God they've dropped, but when they were doing that, parents wanted a male child because the male child in their culture takes on the responsibility of caring for the parents as the parents age. And so everybody wanted to make sure they were cared for, so everybody wanted to have a male child.
Wow. So that's how that's I could never understand why they did what they did.
That's the issue. It's called Social Security. Right? And people are not stupid. They are perfectly aware of their upcoming needs at some level. And so it influenced what they wanted for children. So girl children were more often put up for adoption in order to have that male child.
Wow.
Or a girl child wouldn't be reported, in which case, if she wasn't reported, she wouldn't get education, she wouldn't get health care.
Oh.
Right. So there's a whole undercurrent of people that were not reported. And it wasn't that you couldn't have more kids. You could, but you had to pay a phenomenal tax. And the tax was not hard on people who were city dwellers. It was much more forgiven in cities than it was in more rural settings. In more rural settings where they make less and the tax was higher, it really discouraged the reporting of children in those areas. But it was also easier to hide them. So, yeah, there's groups of wild ones. I don't know what else to call them. I'm sure there's a word for them in Chinese.
It's amazing how the Chinese, Japanese, the Indians, all take care of their elderly.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't understand that there are not parents living in the homes here in America. To them, the idea of moving out and not taking your parent with you is just inconceivable.
Yeah, it's foreign to them.
Yeah. And, I mean, sometimes the parents are shifted, but it's usually the firstborn son. And that's another reason why Chinese very often travel when mom's pregnant, is if you have the child outside of China, it's not subject to the one-child rule. So that was another piece behind the baby tourism. Aside from the obvious piece of, if the kid's born in America, it gets American citizenship. They would go anywhere where they could have the child safely and then come back to China. The American citizenship for kids born here was a little added bonus for the rich. So yeah, if we look back underneath the surface of these kinds of things, we can learn so much about the hows and whys.
Yeah. Yeah, there just seems to be a whole different respect factor in the East.
A lot of their cultures are revering the ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we think of it as worshiping. It's not really so much worshiping as it is revering and honoring. Respecting. And, paying the due to those who gave you life. And if you think about it, we can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, or whatever it was when the first humans walked the earth. It doesn't matter which of those parallels or multiple understandings of the various stories people use. Somewhere back there, humans started, however that happened. And we all come from that very beginning.
I thought it was a Big Bang effect. Now, wait a minute. You're an engineer?
Yeah, and there couldn't be a bang because there wasn't anything to hear sound. So I often joke about it and call it's the big,
Okay.
But it is the big expansion. And actually, Wednesday I had the discussion in class about what part of the Genesis story contradicts the big expansion. The first day, all God does is say, "Let there be light." And it was good. What is that light? Maybe that's the beginning of the expansion.
Whoa. Huh.
Because it can't be a 24-hour day. There's not a sun, moon, and stars. They're not around till Wednesday.
And Timex wasn't invented yet.
Timex wasn't invented, and the world clock was not ticking in Boulder. Folks, hours, minutes, and seconds are much later inventions, and they didn't all occur simultaneously. First was the hour, and then as there was a need to divide it more, then it was minutes, and then as minutes needed to be divided, it was seconds.
Interesting, but not all at the same time.
Not all at the same time. It wasn't just a system popped down, and God certainly didn't give it to us. The Bible talks about watches. The first watch of the day, the second watch of the day, and then after high noon, it's the third and fourth watch of the day, and then there's 4 watches at night. It's about the amount of time that a human being can stay alert and watch. So it makes sense. It's a good unit. And it was good enough. I'll meet you downtown first watch. First thing in the morning, I'll come downtown when I wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And people, because they didn't have as much coffee, thank you, coffee, for keeping us up late, but there weren't as many people who slept in. But there were still night owls. There are people whose natural
it was
rhythms.
pretty much still an culture.
And so you got up with the sun because the sun was in your eyes. There wasn't anything to really block it out. And so you woke up and you started doing things. And you naturally got tired when the sun went down because there wasn't a lot to do. That's where the idea of burning the midnight oil comes from. Burning oil so you could do things at night. And we see oil lamps even in caves from the Roman period and even earlier. There's stuff. And candles are later. Oil lamps precede candles. You had to come up with the technology of dipping a wick in wax and having it burn. Have to create wax first, or at least fashion it, develop it.
Wow.
So if we look back at how technology develops, kids today probably think that Moses had a cell phone in his hip pocket because they're so used to having it. They don't know what it's like to not have a cell phone. They don't know what it's like back when you and I were young and the dinosaurs roamed, as I typically say. But when you would leave home, you got home from school and you said, hey, and you ran out right back out the door and went and played with friends, and your parents didn't know where you were for a couple of hours.
I never lost my wall phone.
No, the wall phone's, well. Okay, so you make me tell a funny story. My mother used to always love long cords between the handset and the receiver. That was the cradle that had the phone in it, the bells and all of those things that literally rung. And we had a desk phone, so it sat on the table, and it had the little hand receiver, and it was on a long cord, but there was also a long coiled cord that attached the handset to the main box. And the phone rings, and my mother answers it, and it's dead. So she hangs up, and a few seconds later it rings again. She picks it up, it's still dead. Puts it down a third time, it rings. She picks it up. And then she finally decided to look down, and she saw that the dog had chewed through the phone cord.
Sure.
So she was like answering and hanging up on
That
people.
happened to us. Yes.
Yeah, the joys of corded phones.
Oh,
And of course,
my
back in the day,
goodness.
so here's a piece. The phone company charged for however many extensions you had
Yes.
in the house.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
they could measure it. They periodically went through and they measured the ringing during the rings, because each ring would drop the voltage, so they
It's
knew
all math.
exactly how many extensions you had, and lo and behold, if they sent the test through, you often got an extended bill.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
back in the day. And then we got jacks, and people would unplug the jacks and plug them back in when they needed them.
It's funny. I didn't even notice. I was making the bed the other day, and we have a phone jack
In the wall?
in back of the bed in the wall. I'm going, wow, this is amazing.
I'm not sure that my house has phone jacks. It's newer. I'm
if
not
you have
sure.
a new, no, our house is built in '92, so they have
Yeah.
them then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mine is 2000 something, but I don't think it has phone jacks. If it does, I don't know. We didn't have a landline. We had a computer-based landline when we first moved here, and we eventually dropped it for the cell phones, and which is why when people call, they call a 520 number.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. It works out really well. If I get a strange 520 number, I know it's probably a telemarketer. Makes it easier
Mm-hmm.
if I don't recognize the number, and I don't get the spam calls as much from Florida because I'm not on their list because I've got a 520 area code.
So did you ever have you said you had a desk phone, a Princess phone
Yeah.
when they came out?
I
Yeah,
did. I
yeah.
had. I was lucky. It was one of my gifts as I got older. I got my own phone, and it was. I don't remember what color it was. It wasn't pink. I'm not that fond of pink. I like blues and oranges much better than pinks. And yeah, you can tell. I frequently dress in blue.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm told that I should dress in blue, that it goes
Really?
well with my eyes.
It looks great. Looks
So-
great.
I have those blue eyes, and blue eyes are very reflective by nature. That's just how they're built. There's really not pigment that makes them blue. It is reflection, which is why they look a little different depending on what I'm wearing, where I am, what's going on. So they're very blue when I'm
Wait
outside
a
in the
minute.
blue sky.
Back up.
Blue is not usually a pigment in nature, or certainly not in blue eyes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, which is why you get hazel-colored eyes.
That's what
Because
I have.
you've got some pigment and the blue reflection going on. That's what makes it the unique.
Huh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Little bit of blue is an interesting piece. The scientists have a field day with it. Blue butterflies are reflective, not pigmented. There are a few things that have pigment, but for the most part, it's a mechanical reflection of light that causes the blue color. Blue is a different color. So it's kind of interesting. It's hard to say what people may or may not have noticed ages ago.
We're midway through the show. Feel free, give us a buzz.
Yeah, give us a buzz at 772, I almost said 520. 772-340-1590 and give us a call. So we are coming up. We're 1 week away from the beginning of the Jewish New Year.
High Holy Day.
Yeah. So.
We have an early high school football game on Thursday.
Okay.
Because Martin County Schools honor the Jewish holidays.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great thing. I wish that Port St. Lucie did a better job of that. They are thankfully giving the kids Yom Kippur off, which is the 25th of September. And so that's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur starts the evening before, the evening of the 24th, and all day of the 25th. We will have morning services, the Torah service. We'll have the goats at 3. We'll have afternoon service at 4, Yisker at 5, and then followed by Ne'ilah, the close of the day of prayer.
And the rabbi goes to sleep for a week.
I wish. The next holiday is only 5 days away. So 25% of Jewish holidays occur in the next weeks, the next month. It's an intense time. And by the time we hit October, or mid-October, I will be exhausted. I always am. There's just so much going on. And it's a tough time. But I'm guessing that it was done so that people would come to Jerusalem or wherever they went for the holidays and be able to stay there for the month and then go home. And the holiday is tucked in, if you will, at the end of the season. So it's really the harvest. It's the perfect time to come to market, to come to Jerusalem, and have all of the wonderful trading that you have at harvest time.
Sell your wares.
Sell your wares. Yeah. Sell your crops and things like that. So it must have been an incredible time. In fact, the rabbis say if you haven't been to Jerusalem during the festival of Sukkot, which is the one that starts on the 15th of the same month as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, on the 1st, the 10th, and the 15th, figure it out, folks. It's intense. But they say that if you haven't been to Jerusalem in Sukkot, you haven't been to a party.
Interesting.
It was 7 days of feasting, sacrifices, i.e. barbecue, and drinking.
You mean a giant luau for 7 days?
Yeah, for 70. And whenever the Bible talks about 70, like 70 oxen were sacrificed, that's a lot of barbecuing meat. Or, as the vegans would say, it makes Jerusalem smell like dead animals. But, yeah, barbecuing. And, if you've got that much meat, of course it's being eaten.
Were there any vegans in the Bible?
I'm sure there were. I'm sure there were.
Oh.
And, yeah. So that was happening. And there was there's a water pouring ritual. Because water in those days had to be poured into wine to make the wine drinkable. We think of wine, again, this time thing. We look at wine, we go into the store now, and we buy this beautiful bottle of the cream, if you will, of the wine, because the dregs and all are filtered out and left, and whatever they do with the dredges. But in those days, that isn't what it was. It was you mash down the grape and you let that mushy stuff ferment, and that made wine. And you can't drink that. So you have to pour the water into the wine to make it drinkable. And it was said that if you could drink wine cut less than 4 times, you were an impressive person. Now, part of that's because of the alcohol content. But the other part of it's just the mechanics. It's more like a mead, a heavy, thick drink, than the wine we have today. And so there was this big ritual where they would draw water by the more than gallon, by just huge amounts, by the log. And they would draw these big vats of water and take them to the temple and pour them into the casks of wine. And you can guess that they would continue to flow on out to the people. Mm-hmm. Because that's what are you else going to do with the watered down wine? And apparently it was just scooped up in pitchers and poured, and pitchers and poured, and pitchers and poured.
Uh-huh, yeah.
And people would drink from the bowl into which it was mixed. There was this cascade, and you didn't spill it. They once pelted the high priest for spilling some of the wine during the ritual. So you can imagine that was quite the thing. It was probably part of a fertility ritual, that if you got some of that wine, it would help you for the coming year, would be my guess, was the common belief. But it was a way of sharing the crop that had fermented. And people had wine for a long time. It's the first thing that Noah builds or plants after the flood is a vineyard. Hello. It is the drink of cheer, as long as it's not overdone. So we come up to the season of High Holy Days, the season of dealing with ourselves and recognizing that we've done it. We do something called a cheshbon nefesh, an accounting of the soul. And so we look back over the past year and we say, what did I do right? What did I do right? I did this, I did that. I did some good things. We also look at what are the things that could have been done a little better. What are the things that perhaps had some unintended consequences? Or where did I just not care enough? Where did I not do what I was in my power to do to make the world better? Because that too is a sin, when you don't do what you can do. We're much more intent about it. And the word for sin in Hebrew is chet. It's an archery term. It means to miss the bullseye.
What's it called again?
Chet. Chet.
Huh. Okay.
It's got one of those sounds in the beginning of it. Right, a chet. And it's to miss the bullseye. So those things that you didn't quite hit the mark that you should have hit, whether it's your own moral behavior or maybe you wanted to make Joe feel good and Jane felt bad, or whatever, as a consequence of your actions. It's to be aware that there are unintended consequences that you are responsible for. If you did the action and it had these consequences, then it's your liability to fix those things. It may not be your intention. That doesn't matter. We're still liable for the things, for the harm we cause unintentionally. Can't just walk away and say, well, I didn't mean to hurt you. First of all, you might not be factual on that little detail, but aside from that, you're liable. And so to the extent that you don't do those things, that you don't fix them, we're supposed to fix as much as we can. We're starting into that intense period of doing that accounting. Where have I missed the mark? Where have I made the mark? Recognizing both the good and the bad. And then at at Rosh Hashanah, the page is turned and it's a new book. So the book is closed on the old year, and you can't change it. It's done. So the impetus is to, before the book closes, before that chapter of 5783 closes, what do you need to make right? What do you need to do so that when the book closes, it balances? You want to see that, maybe you tip the scale a little bit to the good side as best you can. And that's the effort. And then with that, then it's invigorating to come into the new year and recognize that you have a fresh page on which to start writing the story of your life. And the traditional belief is, well, God writes in the book of life, right? But we direct the pen with what we do.
Oh, nice.
We direct the pen. And we actually talk about that in our service. It's ours to influence. Right? Most of the time we write with blotches and crinkles and scratch outs and stuff like that. But the invitation's to write a nice, clean, pretty page in our lives. That's why we start the year with a day of prayer and a celebration. It's considered to be the anniversary or the birthday of the world, of the universe. And that's an interesting piece because, of course, calendars are human. God doesn't dictate a calendar. Well, although perhaps the ancients thought so because the moon goes through its phases. We're in the last week. I looked up Wednesday as I was going to class. The moon was mid-sky, and sure enough, it had 1 quarter left, saying, it was just about a quarter. It was a day off, saying, we're going to be at the new moon come next Friday, a week from today.
Boy, that full moon that we had the other night was gorgeous.
And the holidays are very often at full moon. So Sukkot is the full moon. Jewish
Really?
holidays, yeah. Passover.
That's funny. Okay.
Passover is a full moon. Sukkot's a full moon.
Huh.
But it makes sense if you're going to have a big meal to bring in the holiday. You kind of want it to still be a little bit light outside, full moon.
Wow. Okay.
You can really get a sense for the difference between no moon and full moon when we have an eclipse,
Oh, well,
a lunar eclipse, and you see it go dark and come back to the full moon brightness. Full moon puts a whole lot of light. I am keenly aware of it because I often walk the dogs after dark. There's a lot less for them to get excited about, and it's cooler. It's been so hot during the day that I haven't walked during the day. And so I do a couple laps in the neighborhood at night, and I've definitely noticed the difference in how much moon there's out there as to how light the streets are.
We went down to Cabo for the eclipse of the sun.
Oh, okay.
And this was, I think, 1990 or something like that. And it was incredible.
Yeah.
And it, and being on the beach, you get normal beach attire. It got cold for a little bit.
Yeah, without the sunlight in the air.
Yeah, when there's no sunlight, it was like, wow.
That's what clouds do, too.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
Spectacular sight.
Yeah, it's an amazing world we live in. There's so much to
really
look
is.
at and so much to appreciate. So, yeah, the invitation is to take a look at some of that and just see it. See it afresh. See it for the first time again. And just appreciate the world we live in, how beautiful it is. And appreciate the fact that we do have this course correction ability. We have the ability to look back at ourselves and our lives. Jewishly, we lock it into the holiday, but everybody has that chance anytime you choose to do it. We're, as I like to tell people, we're perfectly human. And to be perfectly human means that we have to make mistakes and learn, or we don't get better. If we don't get better, then we might as well go to seed. It's our job to get better. There's actually a line in the prayer book is, woe to the person who thinks they don't have to improve, that they don't have to grow and learn and do more. Because we can. Even if we live to be 903, there's still more to learn, more to do. There's so much. The hallmark of somebody who's learned something is how much they realize they don't know. The person who thinks they know everything is the bigger fool. Because there's just so much to learn. And so much that you forget as life goes by. And it's not that you're stupid, it's just that there's so much in the brain that not all of it stays in ready recall. It's when you go, oh yeah, I used to remember what that word meant. And you have to look it up again. And we can't retain everything to which we're exposed. We're human. We're finite.
I saw some commercials for this new executive jet, and I was thinking of you, wondering if you were ever going to get back in that pilot seat again. It looked like it would be a ball to fly.
Speaking of having to relearn.
Yes, every year.
Well, yeah, and you did. You had to go through a biennial. And I have gone on, so I'm going to flip it and go, well, okay, let me finish flying. You have to learn all the new regulations, all the new things that are out there. There's a ton to learn, not to mention revitalizing the skills. Is it easier to pick back up? Yes, it's like riding a bike. You don't lose everything. You lose the finesse, but it comes back. And the other side of that, though, is I just filed for a registered internship for my licensing. That's the first step. Dealing with the state and making sure all the pieces are where they need to be.
There you go. Dot the I's and
cross the T's. All of that good stuff.
Yep.
And so that's in. And it was kind of nice because I got this email that said, hey, Dr. Lobb, da-da-da-da. So, they acknowledge it, and it's kind of cool. But, yeah, that was quite a surprise. So that's in process, and hopefully in the next 5 to 10 business days, when they analyze all of the pieces of paper that they now have. The last thing I had to submit, believe it or not, was my marriage certificate and yeah, and a DD-214.
Whoa! Why?
Oh, it's a long story.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, the state does some nice things for veterans and their families.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
so
that's a
since
whole
my
different
husband was a
story.
Vietnam vet, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I have to prove that we are married.
Okay. Well,
And,
all right. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a very good thing. I'm very proud of him. And yeah, so I had to upload those. That was the last two pieces, and I didn't know that I was missing those until I talked to the person up in Tallahassee yesterday. That was fun. That was an hour-long wait.
Yes.
An
Yeah.
hour on hold, 56 minutes.
Welcome to Tally. Yes.
Yeah, it was impressive. I was actually I turned to my students. We were watching a lecture, Randy Pausch's last final lecture, which he gave at Carnegie Mellon. It's an amazing lecture that he records. He knows that he has terminal liver cancer.
Oh.
And he's extremely fit. In fact, he does push-ups and all kinds of antics on the stage to show that he's not an unhealthy person, but he's got terminal cancer. And one of his comments is, you can decide whether to be Tigger or Eeyore, and how you make that decision determines what you do and how you face things. And so he's not sad. He's looking to live every day, and he's actually it was kind of like they had this program at Carnegie Mellon where professors would offer a lecture, and it was called, if this was the last lecture you could ever give on any topic you wanted to give, what would it be? And that's open to whoever comes to it. Carnegie Mellon does a lot of creative things. And so
Great school.
yeah, and he was funny. He said, I finally nailed the venue. This is my last one, and after this I'm retiring because of the medical condition. But he moved his family to where they wanted to be, bought a house, did all kinds of great things, because the doctors told him he has 2 to 3 months of good health left before it starts to impact. And so he was putting as much into that time as he could. And that's a big part of the lecture. And yeah,
Wow.
so that lecture is an hour and some minutes. So we were watching it as a class. That's my way of making sure they actually watch it. But all the time while it's playing, I've got Tallahassee on hold, or Tallahassee has me on hold, and I've got that going. I've got it verbalizing so I can see the. And it was funny because when it finally rang, when the person was really picking it up, my students all looked and they said, "Oh, your call's coming through." So I walked out for like 5 minutes and talked to them. And yeah, but it was a long time on hold, and I just had the phone really down low so it didn't interfere with the video. What a way to, because I can just imagine if I was sitting there on hold that whole time.
Oh, what was their reaction to the video?
We talked about it. It was very powerful. And
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things he says at the end is he said, "This is all a head fake because the lecture's really not for you. It's for my 3 children so that they can see it
Oh, brother.
after I'm gone
Oh,
and know
brother.
who I was and what was important to me," which is an interesting piece. So this is as good a place. We've got 10 minutes left in the show to talk a little bit about something called an Eitz, an ethical will. That is a very big Jewish tradition, and I invite everyone to do it, Jewish or not. And that is to write down, to do what he did. That was his ethical will. Give your family a clue as to what's important to you, what matters, and why you were alive. Because there's a reason you were alive. So share that. Because too often we want to know things about our parents that we can no longer ask them. And if you leave for them your thoughts, your beliefs, your passions, then they can know you better. And they might even find some answers to some of the questions they have by looking back through your stuff. So that's a paying it forward. That's a becoming a real ancestor to your children and their children, or your nieces and nephews and their children. it's important to leave what's important to you. And so, yeah, I look at these shows. I look at the books. I look at the articles I've written, the blogs. All of that can help people understand a little bit of what's important to me. So those are legacies. And thanks to technology, they'll hang around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, what we say and what we do is important, folks. It is who and what we are. As the keynote speaker at my graduation said many moon ago, you are what you do and you do what you want. If you don't like what you are, then change what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful,
Yeah.
and has left an impact on me. I don't remember much of the rest of what he said at the speech, but I do remember that piece. In fact, I wrote it down. When I was a flight instructor, I used to have it on a 3x5 card on the shelf on my cubicle to help me remember to do what's important, to be what's important, and to try to let everything else go. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. I'm me. And so here's the other question. Would you like everything to be perfect and wonderful? The answer really is no if you're honest with yourself. Because if everything was perfect and wonderful day after day after day, it would be worse than the Groundhog Story. Right. Because if all you got up to was perfection, how could you improve? What could you learn? What could you give back? It would be same old, same old, same old, and you'd get bored very quickly. It might be fun for a day or three, but not after that. And the same is true with living forever. Would you really want to live forever?
No, not me.
Yeah, as you well know, getting older is not for sissies.
No.
It takes more and more, and to see things and to recognize mistakes in others is painful. And there are times we just can't do anything about it. We just have to watch them make the mistake and let it happen. Right? And that plays into part of how I teach. I try to teach not the right answers, but how to find the answer that works for you and doesn't hurt anyone else. That's the key. How can we live our lives with beauty, meaning, challenge, interest in ways that don't harm anybody else? I'll go back. This seems to be a nostalgic show for me. I'll go back to my 4th grade teacher who told me, "Your freedom ends 1 inch from my nose." And I know that he quoted that, and I'm forgetting who he quoted it from, but that's a great way to look at it. As long as I don't impact you and your freedoms, then I'm free to do what I choose to do. So, no, I can't do a loud party at 1 a.m. that keeps people up, because that's impinging on their freedom to sleep and have peace. So freedom is not freedom to do anything you want. It comes with responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
You're free to make choices, but with that choice comes the responsibility and the liability for your actions. And that's what this time of year is, Jewishly. It's calendared because people might ignore it otherwise. If it's not on the calendar, you don't necessarily pay attention to it.
And we do have a habit of ignoring stuff.
Yeah, we do. We ignore things that are hard. And this is hard work. And I'm always concerned when somebody says to me, "Well, I did a good job of it last year. I don't really have much to do this year." I'm like, no, I don't think you lived in a cave, isolated from everybody else. And even if you did, take a lesson from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because when he hid in the cave for 13 years, his gaze withered people. So you can just imagine what kind of rotten person he became, not caring about others. So don't isolate yourself. Don't think you've put yourself on that pedestal. And don't let others put you on a pedestal either. We're all human. We're all on this boat together, and none of us has the right to drill a hole under our seat.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe if you're the only person on the boat, but that's not the case. We're all on the boat together. And so we aren't allowed to harm the environment, each other, or anyone else, or ourselves for that matter, because we're part of the system too. And if we harm ourselves, then that puts a responsibility on others to take care of us. Not nice.
All right, let's talk about the services. High Holy.
Services for High Holy Days. The schedule is on www.eitzchayim.org, eitzchayim.org, eitzchayim.org, eitzchayim.org. You can find it on next Friday. It is 7 p.m. to whenever, and it starts again in the morning at 10. And then in the afternoon at 3, we're going to meet by Highland Trails Park and do a walk in the park for Tashlich, casting off of sins. We'll talk about that as probably some more next Friday as we get really close to it. And then on the 24th, services start at 7. That's a Sunday night. We're going to be in the fellowship hall for that service because it's to the back of the building. And we'll be there in the morning again, also at 10. At 10, at 12, at 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we'll go to a restaurant for breakfast.
As you get absolutely no sleep beginning next
That would be
Friday.
correct. So let me just give a quick
Yep.
little toot on the shofar for those who need to hear it. This is the month of Elul, the month of getting ready.
Wow. Surprised you can still breathe.
I could have gone longer. My face is not red yet.
Oh, my goodness.
But I also know that we're coming close to the end of the show, so didn't want to blow a long time. I love this particular shofar that I blew for those who are on Facebook. Here it is. This was my father's shofar. It is a sweet little horn.
So cool.
It is so cool.
Wow. Oh, High Holy Days are here.
They are starting next Friday. If you'd like to make a reservation, please go up on www.eitzchayim.org, eitzchayim.org, and reserve. We accept donations, and we do not tell you what that amount is. We expect you to be an adult. So, yeah, no pay to pray, but we do accept donations.
Pay to pray.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right.
So please do consider joining us. There's still time to make your reservation. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And this has been Ask a Rabbi on the Treasure Coast.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie.